Today, we're diving into a massive shift in how the world operates, the rise of geoeconomics. This is basically the new rulebook for how global powers compete, and trust me, it's changing absolutely everything.
For decades, it kind of felt like the whole world was on the same team, playing by one set of economic rules, all designed so everyone could win together. Well, that game is officially over. The new game is a lot less about cooperation and a whole lot more about competition. So what on earth changed?
To really get what's happening now, we have to rewind the clock and remember the old game. Let's call it the age of globalization. It was an era that was defined by a very specific and very powerful set of ideas about how the global economy was supposed to work.
The whole playbook was really driven by this one big idea from neoclassical economics. Just let free markets do their thing. The core belief was, hey, if you just get out of the way, markets will spread resources around in the most efficient way possible, making everyone wealthier in the process.
And this big idea led to a pretty simple three-part framework. First, central banks had one main job: keep inflation low. That's it. Keep prices stable so businesses could plan. Second, to deal with trade imbalances, the thinking was just let currencies float freely. They'd sort themselves out. And third, and this was the big one, tear down all the walls. Lower tariffs, slash regulations, and just let money and goods flow wherever they could make the most profit.
So what was the ultimate goal here? Well, it all boiled down to one thing: maximum global efficiency. The theory driving it all was comparative advantage. The idea that if every country just focuses on what it does best and then trades with everyone else, the whole world wins. We all get richer together.
Sounds pretty neat in theory, right? But in practice, well, this whole system, with its laser focus on pure efficiency, started to show some really serious cracks.
Problem number one: financial instability. The very system that promised stability was instead just rocked by one crisis after another, and they kept getting bigger and bigger. You had the Latin American debt crisis in the 80s, the Asian financial crisis in the 90s, all building up to the massive global crash of 2008, and then the European crisis right after.
And that leads us straight to the second huge issue. All the incredible wealth created by globalization, it wasn't exactly being shared. Just look at the US. In 1990, the richest 1% owned about a quarter of the country's wealth. Fast forward to today, and they own over a third. The economic pie got bigger, for sure, but a very small number of people got a much, much bigger slice.
So, when you have these two things happening at once, terrifying financial meltdowns and skyrocketing inequality, the old agreement just completely fell apart. That whole "the world is flat" idea, the belief that free markets were the answer to everything, it came under serious attack. Trust in the system evaporated, protectionism came roaring back, and then huge shocks like the pandemic were really the final nail in the coffin. The old way of thinking was officially done.
All right, so the old playbook has been thrown in the trash. What's taking its place? Welcome to the new game, geoeconomics. And here is the absolute key difference. The goals of the game have fundamentally changed. The old game was all about asking, how do we make the pie bigger for everybody? The new game asks, how do we protect our slice of the pie? And even more importantly, how can we use our slice of the pie to gain more power and influence? It's a complete 180 in thinking.
This new mindset completely rewrites the rules. The focus is shifting away from being specialized to something called scale economy. In simple terms, being big is now way more important than being the best at one specific thing. And why is that? Because in a world obsessed with security, scale gives you control. Having a huge domestic market means you're less dependent on others. Having massive production capacity means you can influence global supply chains. That sheer size gives you a massive strategic advantage.
So where is this new game of scale being played out? Well, the main event, the real showdown, is between the world's two biggest economies, the United States and China. And their competition is defining this new era across three critical arenas.
This table really breaks down the rivalry. First, in manufacturing. China's advantage is its unbelievable scale of production. The US counters with the world's biggest wallet, its huge consumer market. Then you've got digital and AI. China has that massive domestic market and a deep talent pool, while the US has those globally dominant tech giants. And finally, finance. This is where the US has a real ace up its sleeve. The exorbitant privilege of controlling the world's reserve currency, the dollar, which gives it immense financial power.
And this quote just perfectly captures the new logic. This isn't about finding a win-win situation anymore. It's a zero-sum game. The core strategy is to build up your own economic scale and your own power while actively working to contain and even shrink your rivals.
So how do you fight this new battle? Well, governments are dusting off a very old and very powerful tool that was kind of out of fashion for a while: massive government spending. In other words, fiscal policy is back in a huge way.
You can really see this in the West, especially in the US, where government spending is back in the driver's seat. I mean, just look at this jump. The US federal deficit went from just over 1% of GDP before the 2008 crisis to over 6% today. This isn't just a temporary fix for a crisis. It is a fundamental, strategic shift in how the economy is run.
And this matters so much because where the government decides to spend its money now dictates the priorities of the entire economy. We're talking huge investments into strategic areas like defense, bringing manufacturing back home, what they call reshoring, and pouring subsidies into critical technologies like semiconductors. The whole idea of small government is basically over.
Okay, but what about China? They're also spending big to compete, right?
Well, yes, but their efforts are running into a really powerful and unique headwind that's holding them back.
And this incredible number, this number explains pretty much everything. Over 70% of new loans in China's private sector aren't going to new investments or to people spending money. Nope, it's being used just to pay off the interest on old debts.
This creates what economists call a massive debt drag on the economy. So even while the government is pumping all this money into the system, most of it is just getting sucked into this black hole of past obligations instead of fueling new growth. It's like trying to fill a bucket that has a giant hole in the bottom.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. What are the big takeaways? First, the era of cooperative globalization is over. Done. Second, national security has replaced economic efficiency as the #1 goal for major powers. Third, this new competition is being fought primarily between the US and China across 3 main fronts: manufacturing, tech, and finance. And finally, the main weapon in this new contest is government spending. Fiscal policy is king.
And all of this leaves us with one final and maybe the most critical question to think about. As nations all pivot away from maximizing efficiency and towards maximizing their own security, that shift isn't free. It comes at a cost. So as this new era unfolds, the real question we have to ask is, who or what ends up paying the price?